You have an ambitious but unproven hypothesis. You've done market research. You've listed your assumptions, what must be true. Now you need proof. And a good idea is a proven idea. To prove a hypothesis, we need to validate our assumptions. We do this by turning our assumptions into questions and designing experiments to gather proof that our guess is correct. And this gives us the ability to make strategic decisions. Did we miss something? Do we need to pivot? Or were we right? Let's persevere down this path. How do we gain confidence that what we're about to do is the right thing? Not just anything. This is really about de-risking. And validation is evidence that your hypothesis is correct. You can't rely on your intuition or your optimism, the opinions of your colleagues or your friends, but data beats opinions. And validation is an indicator of product market fit. You want to get evidence that you have product market fit in the cheapest, quickest, most effective manner possible. It's important to understand that new ventures are inherently risky. If it's never been done before, you don't have all the facts and the figures to give you beyond a reasonable doubt certainty. So validation is the way to build confidence that you're doing the right thing. Now, what does this mean in practical terms? This is a discovery-driven approach to innovation, popularized by Rita McGrath, who has published some great work on this. What we do in practical terms is design experiments to validate your assumptions. And these can be plotted on a roadmap, checkpoint 1, 2, 3, etc. These checkpoints serve as pivot or persevere decision points. They answer the question, were we right about our assumptions, or do we need to change something? And in practice, we prioritize our cheapest and our quickest experiments early, so that if you need to pivot, you can do so sooner rather than later. And if you find that you need to pivot or abandon, well, you've done so in the quickest and cheapest manner possible. If you find that you have validation, congratulations. You've done so early and can proceed with confidence. When thinking about designing experiments, there's a variety of methods to use. And at this point, I'll plug the book, The Right It by Alberto Savoia, who speaks at length about why it's important to validate early and ways to gather data quickly and cheaply. But the best question to ask when designing an experiment is, what am I trying to prove? That should guide your decision-making, because the answer is whatever it takes to prove that assumption. And clue, it doesn't require you to code or build. If you can sell it before you build it, do it. Why buy when you can lease? Why code a custom website when you can use a template, a site like Squarespace? Why stock inventory when you can build on demand? This is actually the Tesla model. From the beginning, Tesla does not produce any vehicles until it receives enough deposits. Can you do the same? Can you put up a pop-up shop instead of renting or buying space? Can you use a ghost kitchen for your restaurant concept instead of building out space? Can you mock your fashion designs and sell the concepts online? How can you best validate your assumption? Let's go back to Quibi for a second, right? Quibi, this online mobile content viewing app, assumed that people would find their content interesting enough to watch and then pay for it. But why do you need an app to validate that? These are totally independent from each other. You could have just put the content there out on YouTube. Are people watching it? This is another example of companies making up problems and leading with a capability. Everybody wants to buy an app, but why don't you prove first that people want what you're going to put on that app, right? Pop-up shops, farmers markets, those are other ways that people use to validate their ideas. Bobo Guys teas, they started with creating very small batches, going to these pop-up shops or these farmers market and testing it with their ideal target market, perfecting that recipe, getting validation that people would indeed buy what they build before they invest in opening up their own location. And this is another opportunity to flex your creativity muscles. How creative can you get with designing validation test experiments? So after you've listed your critical assumptions, do people want this? Will they know what to do with it? Will they pay for it? Will they trust it? Can we deliver it? It's time to design validation experiments. And here are some examples. You have Airbnb. Everybody knows what Airbnb is. It's a marketplace where people can rent and share a home, right? For those that want it. They had a critical assumption, right? That what must be true? People must be willing to stay in a night in a stranger's home in order for this hypothesis to be correct. How do they validate that? These guys went on Craigslist and put air mattresses for rent in their living room floor with the promise of breakfast in the morning. Airbnb stands for literally air, bed, and breakfast. And they got people to rent this air mattress for $80 a night. They didn't write a single line of code, but they validated this assumption that if we provided this service, then yes, people will do something with it for whatever those reasons were. Zappos is another example. This is an online shoe retailer. And at the time that Zappos started, it was actually quite innovative, right? At this time, buying online or fashion online was completely new. It was still conventional to try on your shoes before you bought them. And so this idea of building an online marketplace for shoes had an apparent or underlying assumption. What must be true? Well, people must be willing to buy shoes online without trying them on in order for this hypothesis to be correct. So what did they do? They put up a website with fake inventory. And only when someone actually made a purchase on the site did they buy the real inventory and shipped it out. They validated it. It worked. Amazon buys it for $1.2 billion. Rent the Runway, I mentioned before, had this hypothesis that a young woman would prefer to rent dresses for special occasions instead of buying them outright. Well, what was the must-be true statement of that? That women would be willing to rent dresses that they can't physically try on, right? Or see. So how did they validate that? What these ladies did was they took pictures or photos of these dresses that they could rent and printed them out on photo paper. They went to an event at a college campus that had 1,000 students there, and they got 5% of the women to rent it. They didn't build a website. They just printed these pictures out and got 5%. And this gave them the confidence that if they build the service, that people would use it. And that's the validation that we're looking for. And that's the point of these pivot or persevere checkpoints, validation that you should persevere.